You are the founder of the Lanterns.
This is when most candidates ask, why me?
I know exactly why me.
What do you think of Hal Jordan?
I don't think about him.
Lanterns Episode 1 has arrived on HBO, and it has done something that no DC adaptation has ever successfully pulled off in its very first hour. It made the ring matter. Not the powers, not the mythology, not the intergalactic scope of the Green Lantern Corps. The ring, the specific, sentient, consciousness-containing piece of technology that Hal Jordan has been wearing for 30 years and that John Stewart is only now learning to trust. And then the pilot's final minutes ripped all of that certainty away in a single image. Hal Jordan, frozen dead in the bleachers of a Rushville, Nebraska football stadium, no ring on his finger, a bullet hole above his broken nose, with John Stewart standing over him wearing no ring either. The question every fan is now carrying into Episode 2 is not who killed Hal Jordan, it is what the absence of both rings means, and whether the answer to that question is darker than anything the show's True Detective comparisons prepared the audience to expect. Did Hal give his ring away before he died, and if so, to whom and why? What is the alien plot in Rushville that has been running for at least 30 years, and that Hal's ring stored a backup message about long enough in advance to deliver it a decade later? Who is Waylon Sanders, and what did the detonation of his body bomb confirm about the scale of the extraterrestrial presence in that small Nebraska town? Is Sheriff Kerry Kane's resistance to Hal and John's involvement a personality conflict, or does she know something about Rushville that she is deliberately keeping out of the official investigation? And what happened to Rushville in the decade between 2016 and 2026 that left parts of the town looking like they had been hit by something that no bar fight and no mass shooting could have caused? Every one of those questions has an answer, and this breakdown covers all of them. The single most important structural decision in Lanterns Episode 1 is not the plot it sets up, it is the timeline architecture it establishes. The pilot opens in 1996, where a young John Stewart watches Hal Jordan being interviewed on 60 Minutes. Hal is in his Green Lantern uniform, and he is explaining to the nation that the Corps exists, that he is a member, and that after losing his father in a plane crash, fear no longer controls him. A young John watches this. His Marine father then takes him outside and forces him to stand perfectly still while he shoots an apple off his head. The same fear elimination lesson, administered differently, by a different kind of hero. The parallel is deliberate and devastating, because it tells the audience that John Stewart was shaped toward the ring long before the ring ever chose him. However, unfortunately, the timeline that matters most is not the 1996 origin, but the 2016 present-day investigation and the 2026 flash-forward that the pilot uses to reframe everything that 2016 contains. Every scene set in 2016, every moment Hal and John spend in Rushville, every clue they uncover, every alliance and antagonism they build, exists in the shadow of a future that the pilot has already shown the audience. Hal is dead in 2026. John is not wearing his ring. Parts of Rushville appear to have been destroyed by something that no investigation gone wrong and no bar fight could have caused. The structural effect of that foreknowledge is specific and deliberate. It means the audience cannot watch Hal and John successfully contain the Sanders situation and feel relief. They solved one problem. The problem underneath it is still running. The evidence from how Chris Mundy used this same architecture in Ozark, the Birded family winning individual battles while the larger war closed in on them from every direction, tells the audience that Lanterns is not going to offer clean victories. Every episode is going to end with the audience knowing that 10 years from the moment they just watched, one of these men will be dead in the bleachers. Showrunner Chris Mundy built Ozark on exactly this structure. The weight of a known destination making every step toward it feel heavier than it otherwise would. The evidence from how that structural choice shapes the pilot's emotional register tells the audience that Lanterns is not primarily a superhero show about two men solving a crime. It is a show about 10 years of decisions that end in one inevitable place, and Episode 1 is the first of those decisions. The most likely explanation for what Hal's ring hologram reveals about the Rushville case is also the most unsettling one, and the evidence from the pilot's specific mechanics makes it impossible to ignore. Hal Jordan programmed a backup of his own consciousness into his ring at some point in the past, a younger, kinder version of himself, described by critics as less worn down and more emotionally open than the present-day Hal. This backup activated when the ring detected something relevant and delivered a message to John. There's hail in Rushville, Nebraska. The message sounds simple. The implications are not. For Hal to have created a consciousness backup and programmed it with a specific geographic trigger, he would have needed to anticipate, perhaps years in advance, that Rushville would become relevant. The evidence from the pilot strongly suggests that Hal has been to Rushville before, not in 2016, earlier. The 1986 flashback that shows Hal being chosen as Abin-Sur's successor is not scene-setting detail. It is the show establishing that Hal's relationship with the Green Lantern Corps began at a specific moment in American history, and that moment may be directly connected to whatever alien presence has been operating in Rushville since before John Stewart was born. The most logical conclusion from those data points is that the Rushville murder investigation in 2016 is not a new crisis. It is the resurgence of something that Hal Jordan encountered at the beginning of his time as a Lantern and never fully resolved. However, unfortunately, that interpretation of the hologram message carries a devastating implication for how Hal's death in 2026 should be read. If Hal knew Rushville was eventually going to surface as a crisis significant enough to warrant a consciousness backup and a preloaded message, then Hal also likely knew that the Rushville situation had the potential to kill him. The evidence from the younger hologram being kinder and less worn down, existing before the decade that aged Hal into the harder man John trains under in 2016, strongly suggests that Hal created the backup early, before the weight of whatever he discovered in Rushville had fully settled on him. That is the message of a man preparing for something he could not stop. The theory that changes the shape of every scene in Episode 1 is the one about Waylon Sanders, and the evidence from the pilot's interrogation sequence is the most specific intelligence the show delivers about the nature of the threat. Hal engineers his own arrest through a bar fight, gets bailed by Billy Macon, Kerry Kane's husband, played by Jason Ritter, and uses that connection to access William Macon, Garrett Dillahunt's character, who arranges for Hal to interrogate the suspect from the football field shooting. The interrogation reveals that Waylon Sanders is not human. He is an alien who has been operating in Rushville, and when his cover is exposed, he detonates a bomb he has been carrying inside his own body, apparently willing to die rather than be captured and questioned. Hal uses the last of his ring's power to contain the explosion, which saves lives, but also confirms something critical. Whatever Sanders was part of, the people involved in it are willing to destroy themselves rather than give it up. However, unfortunately, the evidence from the pilot's final flash forward makes the Sanders revelation even more disturbing in retrospect. If one alien operative in Rushville was willing to die to protect the operation, what does the scale of the Rushville damage visible in 2026 tell the audience about how many others there were, and what the operation ultimately became? Sanders was not the architect, he was a foot soldier, and a foot soldier who dies for the mission rather than giving it up is a foot soldier who believes the people above him are capable of something worse than death if the mission is compromised. The most emotionally significant scene in Episode 1 is not the bombing, and it is not the flash forward. It is the moment Hal tells John that his ring just tried to kill him, and John calls his father to complain. The car test, Hal jumping out of a moving vehicle to force John to use the ring for the first time, the car heading off a cliff, John getting the ring onto his finger at the last possible second and surviving, is the show's clearest statement about what the Hal Jordan and John Stewart dynamic actually is. This is not a warm mentorship. Hal is not nurturing John. He is testing him with lethal stakes, because that is how Hal learned, by surviving things he should not have survived, and because Hal genuinely believes that the ring chooses people who do not need to be taught so much as proven. However, unfortunately, what the show layers over that dynamic with devastating precision is the knowledge that something goes terribly wrong. The ring chose John. The ring also chose Hal. 30 years ago, and in 2026, Hal is dead without his ring, and John is standing over him without his. The evidence strongly suggests that the question the show is actually asking is not whether John Stewart is worthy of the ring. He obviously is. The question is whether being worthy is enough when the thing the ring is up against has been operating on Earth longer than either of them has been alive and is willing to destroy itself rather than be stopped. While the Hal and John dynamic and the Rushville mystery dominate the pilot, there is another character whose role every fan needs to take seriously from the very first scene she appears in, and it belongs to Sheriff Kerry Kane. Kelly MacDonald's Kerry is introduced as a direct obstacle to Hal's investigation and spends most of episode 1 making clear she does not want him in her town. She forbids him from joining the investigation. She refers to both him and John in extremely colorful language over her radio. She is exactly the kind of competent, territorial local law enforcement official who appears in every true detective-style investigation as the gatekeeper between the outside protagonist and the town's secrets. However, unfortunately, the evidence from the pilot's 2026 flash-forward adds a dimension to Kerry that makes her Season 1 function far more complex than a simple obstacle. She is still in Rushville in 2026. She is still the sheriff. She was waiting for John when he returned. She knew where Hal's body was. She led him to the bleachers. The evidence from that specific knowledge, the fact that Kerry Kane knew Hal Jordan was dead in the football stadium before she called John, tells the audience that Kerry has been carrying a piece of this story for 10 years without being able to share it with anyone equipped to act on it. She is not just a local sheriff who got involved in something bigger than she understood. She is a woman who has been inside the mystery for a decade, and her relationship with John Stewart in the present-day 2026 investigation is built on everything they did together in 2016. The evidence strongly suggests that Kerry Kane's resistance to Hal in the pilot is not simply jurisdictional stubbornness. It is the resistance of someone who already knows that the men who investigate things in Rushville do not come out of it cleanly, and who has been living in the town long enough to understand what the investigation costs the people who undertake it. What the show appears to be building toward across Season 1 is a Kerry Kane who becomes one of the most important figures in the entire story, not because she is a hero in the traditional sense, but because she stayed. While Hal and John could leave Rushville, Kerry could not. She is the town. Every answer the investigation needs has been accumulating in her memory for 30 years. The secondary dimension of Episode 1 that positions the season as a fully integrated piece of the larger DC universe is the confirmed presence of the Manhunters as the season's antagonists, revealed in the SDCC trailer, released 1 month before the premiere. The Manhunters are ancient robotic peacekeepers created by the Guardians of the Universe, the same cosmic authority that created the Green Lantern Corps, who malfunctioned and were decommissioned eons ago. Their programming was corrupted by a flaw in their construction that caused them to determine that sentient life was the source of all disorder in the universe. In DC Comics mythology, the Manhunters are the precursors to the Green Lantern Corps. They came first, they failed catastrophically, and their failure is the reason the Guardians decided to create a police force powered by willpower rather than programming. The presence of Manhunters in Rushville, Nebraska in 1986, 2016, and potentially into 2026 tells the audience that the alien operation Hal Jordan has been tracking for 30 years is not the work of a random extraterrestrial criminal. It is the resurgence of the oldest enemy the Green Lantern Corps has ever faced, and it has been operating in the American heartland for decades without anyone, human or lantern, understanding the full scope of what it was doing there. The evidence from the Manhunter mythology applied to the pilot's specific details opens a theory that the show appears to have been building toward from its very first scene. The Manhunter's core programming malfunction was the belief that sentient life is the source of all chaos. Their solution, in the comics, was not containment or reform. It was elimination. If Manhunters have been present in Rushville since 1986, the most logical conclusion is that the mass shooting at the football field was not the beginning of the operation. It was a moment where the operation's edge became visible. the point where the Manhunters' presence in that town escalated in a way that could no longer be hidden from local law enforcement or from the ring that Hal Jordan has been carrying for 30 years. The evidence strongly suggests that Rushville, Nebraska is not a random location. It is a site the Manhunters chose for a specific reason, and that reason is what Episode 2 needs to begin revealing. After everything Episode 1 has established, the dual timeline, Hal's dead body, John's missing ring, the Manhunter connection, the Rushville conspiracy that predates John Stewart's birth, the question every fan is holding before Episode 2 arrives is the simplest one. Lanterns premieres on HBO every Sunday at 9/8C, with episodes streaming on Max the same day. The 8-episode season runs through its finale in October. The pilot was directed by James Hawes, who helmed the first 2 episodes of Slow Horses, one of the most acclaimed spy dramas in recent television history, and that comparison is doing exactly the work it was intended to do. Slow Horses made audiences care about institutional failure and the cost of secrets kept too long inside professional bodies. Lanterns is making the audience care about a 30-year alien conspiracy in a small Nebraska town, and the 2 men trying to understand it from opposite ends of the same decade. Based on everything Episode 1 established, and everything the SDCC trailer confirmed about the Manhunters, the 7 episodes that follow are going to deliver the most ambitious superhero television story HBO has ever attempted. Now the conversation moves to the fans. 3 questions need answering before Episode 2. The 2026 flash forward shows Hal dead without his ring, and John not wearing his either. Does John's ringless state in 2026 mean he gave the ring back to the Corps, had it taken from him, or chose to remove it because of what happened to Hal? And which of those 3 answers changes the nature of the investigation most completely? Waylon Sanders detonated himself rather than be interrogated, which confirms the Rushville operation is run by people who consider their operatives expendable, but the episode ended before Hal could question him, which means the only intelligence the Lanterns have is what they observed at the crime scene and what Hal already suspected. Does Episode 2 open with new bodies in Rushville, or with the consequences of Sanders' explosion rippling through a town that is already barely holding its secrets together? And the question the pilot's dual timeline makes most urgent, when the 2026 investigation fully begins and John Stewart returns to Rushville to find Hal dead in the bleachers, does he know what he is going to find before he gets there? Or is the discovery of Hal's frozen body the moment everything John thought he understood about the previous 10 years stops making sense at all? The video on screen covers everything else fans need to know before Episode 2 drops next Sunday on HBO.